Welcome to Alaska Weather, a production of Alaska Public Media and the National Weather Service, Alaska Region. Produced and broadcast daily from the studios of KAKM, Alaska Weather provides complete forecasts, public, marine, and aviation for all of Alaska. Alaska Weather is made possible by the following sponsors.
The National Weather Service.
Hello and welcome to the Friday edition of Alaska Weather. I'm Kimberley Hoeppner and today is August 4th, 2017. When we're not here, you can always check our information out by going to www.weather.gov/Alaska and click on your area of choice. Now, just to recap the day today, it was very warm, and we had a Facebook post that went out of the southeast. Juneau office, the forecast office there, is forecasting this for Saturday, mostly sunny skies for the weekend in the upper 70s to even upper 80s. I'm going to step over here to the other side of the screen so you can take a look at the temperatures for tomorrow. They're going to see around 80 degrees there in Juneau and expecting 75 degrees in Petersburg, 76 in Wrangell, 74 degrees in Clowalk, and up here in Gustavus we're expecting 75 degrees. So today already the warmest spot in the state has been Hyder at 86 degrees. So very warm indeed, and just thought we'd brag a little bit for the southeast as they've stayed warm for the last 3 to 4 days. It's been topping the temperatures across the state. Now on to the concerns across the state. We have a flood advisory still here along the southern areas of the Brooks Range, and we're looking at these locations for the flooding on the rivers there for the lower Koyukuk Valley, for the Kobuk, Alatna, and Noatak rivers. Expect river rises. However, they're not going to be sharp rises through the weekend, but they are going to still continue to rise as they received quite a few inches of rain during the last several days. Now let's take a look at the systems that are bringing the weather across the state. I'm sorry, a quick look at the fire danger map before we go on to the satellites. The main concerns across the state this weekend are going to be across the northern channels there in the southeast and the panhandle, drier conditions, so slightly higher fire danger in that area as they remain dry. Now for the satellite data, the biggest focus here are the two low pressure systems out there across the Bering and the Alaska Peninsula. Putting this into motion, you can see there's a lot of clouds streaming across, and across the southeastern areas of the state, a much better clearing. The first few frames here are the infrared satellite, and we switch over to the visible satellite to really show the breaks in the clouds there for the southeast. So we had broken clouds all across the southern tier of the state today, with low-level clouds still continuing across the northern tier of the state. Now on this satellite picture, this is the infrared imagery. You can clearly see the circulations of the two low pressure systems that we're looking at to the west. And as I put this into motion, those two systems are kind of merging in together, forming one large low pressure system. So putting that into motion one more time, take a glance at those lows as they merge together. Behind these two systems, we have an upper level ridge that's just to the southwest of Shemya. So here's that red ridge, and that's bringing some widespread fog conditions across much of the Bering down to 1 mile or less at times, and then the low pressure center at the surface is just here along the Alaska Peninsula this afternoon, with light rain and drizzle around the low pressure system, also bring reduced visibilities. Now a stable air mass also across the Gulf waters had brought with some moisture trapped underneath the upper level ridge along the western areas of the Gulf, saw quite a bit of areas of fog this morning for Kodiak, reducing visibilities down to 1/2 mile at times. Across the southeast and eastern areas, that ridge is building into the interior locations of the state, with some just light showers as a weak boundary remained across the southeastern area of the Brooks Range there. Now, to the north, we do have a cooler air mass that's approaching the northwest coast. However, any of the light rain is staying well north of the coast at this point. However, tonight we do have a weak shortwave that's going to move out ahead of that system with some moist air mass already in place. That's going to produce a few showers all the way across the southern end of the Brooks Range. However, we're not expecting much accumulation, maybe up to 1/10 of an inch with that. Now, across the Alaska Peninsula, they've received quite a bit of rain. Cold Bay actually reported just under 3/4 of an inch of rain this morning or this afternoon at 73 hundredths for the afternoon report. And light rain is going to continue to develop all around the low pressure system, bringing less accumulations for the overnight forecast, probably 1/4 of an inch or less. And then across the western areas of the Bering, on the drier side of things, although a few weak disturbances will bring some light rain showers across the Pribilof Islands, bring continued reduced visibilities to those locations. Now, the fog conditions are going to persist through the Saturday as this ridging stays in place and a new ridge also develops across the northern areas of the Bering into the Bering Strait. Meanwhile, low pressure in the Arctic will swing a weak trough down towards the northwest surface, and that's going to produce a few more showers in the early morning on Saturday. And then the central areas of the state are going to see one of the warmest days so far. And of course, for Juneau and the southeast, they're going to see temperatures in the 70s and 80s, as well as across much of the interior parts of the state. Slightly cooler temperatures along the waters across the southwest will be in the 60s, but a few locations across the Kuskokwim Valley and down through Bristol Bay will see temperatures peaking in the 70-degree range, and we're going to see weak instability during the afternoon, possibly bringing an isolated shower mainly across the mountains there to the west in Bristol Bay. Now, the low pressure system is going to be continuing to weaken, but it's going to hold steady there to the south of the Alaska Peninsula through your Sunday forecast, and weak disturbances rotating through the flow aloft is going to continue a light showery pattern. On the backside of this low pressure system, stable air mass is going to be shifting some of that fog over towards the Bristol Bay location. And then across the south central areas, I know we're seeing a little bit more rain pop up on Sunday, but that's going to be later in the afternoon with the moisture fetch coming in up ahead of this low pressure system and riding ahead of the ridge. It's going to be streaming some moisture inland, and that's going to bring some isolated thunderstorms from Fairbanks and south, and we'll see along the Alaska range and possibly an isolated thunderstorm or two across the Talkeetna Mountains. Across the southeast, they should stay drier for another day. However, they are going to be slightly cooler in the upper 60s to lower 70s as they get more of an onshore flow component as that ridge begins to drift to the south. Now, across the northern tier of the state, slightly cooler conditions as well as a cold front kind of slides into the north coast, and then we have a reinforcing cold air mass coming in behind the initial cold air. However, that cold air is just going to stay along the coast there. Across the west, another weak disturbance is going to come in and start breaking the ridge down or shoving a little bit further to the south. So foggy and light rain conditions will possibly move back into the western and central Aleutians by the end of the weekend. Now let's take a look at the temperatures across the state today, primarily in the upper 60s to lower 70s across south central, and the warmest was the southeast, with Hyder seeing 86 degrees this afternoon, mostly in the lower 70s down towards Annette. And then across the central areas of the state, well into the upper 60s. Along the north coast, still a little bit cooler there in the mid 40s. Along the eastern Beaufort Sea coast with 50s towards Barrow. Barrow's coldest this morning at 38 degrees. Across the northwest coast, we saw temperatures reaching into the lower to mid 60s with reports in the 70s along that Seward Peninsula. Across the southwest, we saw temperatures climbing into the mid-60s with coastal areas slightly cooler into the upper 50s. Across the Alaska Peninsula, temperatures were in the mid-50s with a cooler and stable air mass to the west, mainly in the upper 40s with a few reports in the mid-50s. Looking at your temperatures for the overnight, fairly stable conditions overnight across the Bering Alaska Peninsula in the upper 40s to lower 50s. And then across the Gulf locations, temperatures will be ranging in the low to upper 50s. Across the interior areas, slightly warmer with temperatures in the mid 50s. And then along the coast, a little bit cooler there along the eastern Beaufort Sea coast in the mid 40s and near 50 degrees along the western coast. Looking at your high temperatures for tomorrow, here's those widespread warm temperatures across the state, climbing into the upper 70s with a few reports expected into the 80-degree range. Now, looking at the southeast, a little bit cooler there along the panhandle, probably near 70 degrees, but for the most part, locations are going to warm up very quickly during the morning hours. Across the southwestern tier of the state, there's those temperatures as well, getting up into the mid-70s expected. And then across the Bering, again, temperatures will be slightly warmer there as well, making the low to mid-50 range. So for your flying weather tomorrow, the main concerns are going to be across the Bering and the northern tier of the state with IFR and MVFR conditions along the Brooks Range, and also across much of the southwest coastal locations, and also from Kodiak and the southern Gulf with that stable air mass in place that will cause some IFR and MVFR conditions. Let's take a look at the afternoon. In the afternoon, we're supposed to improve across much of the state. However, Kodiak will be down with cloudy and low stratus through much of the day tomorrow. The southeast will stay clear. The stable air mass will stay entrenched over the Gulf waters, and then the remainder of the Bering is going to be mainly under IFR conditions through the afternoon. Let's take a look at your passes in more depth. We'll see Anaktuvik go from IFR to VFR, and Adigan Pass is going to be MVFR and go to VFR. Looking at MVFR to VFR conditions for Lake Clark and Merrill Pass, and Rainy will be MVFR going to VFR. And we'll see Windy Pass stay VFR all day, and Isabel will be VFR as well. Mentasta, VFR, and Tanita will be VFR. Great flying weather for Portage there, VFR, and Chilkoot and White Pass will also be VFR. So good flying conditions, good marine conditions. We're going to talk about that in just a few minutes after the break. Let's look at your freezing levels for tomorrow. These are going to be slightly higher in the 10 to 12,000 foot range across the state, increasing to 14,000 across the southeast. And then for the Bering, we're seeing the coldest areas across the central and southern Bering, so 8,000 climbs to 12,000 out there to the west. Now, looking at your icing for tomorrow, the main concerns are going to be above 9,000 feet for the areas of the Bering and the North Pacific there. And to the northwest, we'll see icing, light icing around 8,000 feet or greater. The jet stream tomorrow is quite amplified with a higher jet speed coming across the western areas of the Bering. There's that trough along the Alaska Peninsula. The main interest here today is that the northern jet has shifted to the north. So the systems to come are going to be more out of the North Pacific and possibly wetter for next week. Now, a low pressure system here around the Alaska Peninsula has a speed max across the Alaska Peninsula and Kodiak between 30 to 45 knots, lighter speeds across the interior, except for the northwest coast between 25 to 40 knots to the north, and then across the western Bering, 30 to 40 knots out of the north direction. Very similar winds with the speed maxes in the same locations across the Alaska Peninsula and the northwestern tier of the state with lighter speeds across the southeast. Turbulent areas to watch are going to be across the northwest Alaska Peninsula and also across the western areas of the Aleutians. We'll be back in just a moment with your marine forecast.
In recent years, the GPS receiver has been one of the most useful tools for professional pilots, drivers, and seafarers. These receivers use geospatial data to identify geographic locations and characteristics of natural and man-made features on the Earth.
These receivers are also being used by hikers, golfers, and fishermen for recreation purposes. However, many people who use this technology still don't know exactly how it works.
Our Johnny Alonso finds out how this complex system helps keep many of us on track and on schedule.
Trying to figure out where you are and where you're going has always been a challenge. Navigation and positioning are crucial to so many activities, and yet the process has not always been easy. Thankfully, the days of navigating by celestial means or landmarks are long gone since the introduction of GPS, or the Global Positioning System. So what is GPS? For some answers, I spoke with Dr. Kevin Dutton at NASA Langley to find out how it works.
GPS stands for the Global Positioning System, and like the name suggests, it's a system to find your location anywhere on the Earth or near the Earth's surface. And the way it does that is by using radio frequency broadcasts from orbiting satellites.
Can you tell me why GPS was originally developed?
It was developed by the Defense Department to meet all of their navigational needs. For example, aircraft and ships at sea. And now even individual soldiers carry little receivers like this in the field to find out where they are.
The Global Positioning System consists of a constellation of 24 satellites and their ground stations working together. GPS uses these man-made stars as reference points to calculate positions accurate to a matter of meters, and in some cases centimeters. As long as you have a GPS receiver and a clear view of the sky and a map, you'll never be lost again. Today, GPS is finding its way into cars, boats, planes, construction equipment, farm machinery, even laptop computers. So how does the system work?
Let's say you're backpacking and you have a receiver with you. You're going to turn on that receiver. Now the GPS satellites are constantly broadcasting a signal, all 24 of them, but above you at any one time there's only 12 available, and then the other 12 are on the other side of the Earth.
Okay.
So your receiver is going to listen and try to find at least 4 of these satellites directly above you. And then it's going to determine a range to each satellite, and it's going to use those ranges and the known locations of the satellites, and it's going to do some mathematical calculations and a process called trilateration, and it's going to figure out where that GPS receiver is. That'll also give you altitude, and it'll give you speed and the direction that you're traveling in.
A standard GPS receiver will not only place you on a map at any particular location, but will also trace your path across a map as you move. If you leave your receiver on, it can stay in constant communication with GPS satellites to see how your location is changing. With this information and its built-in clock, the receiver can give you several pieces of valuable information like how far you've traveled, how long you've been traveling, your current speed and your average speed. Also, the estimated time of arrival at your destination if you maintain your current speed.
There's a lot of uses that they hadn't really thought about when they developed the system. For example, later on it was discovered that if you put multiple antennas on a vehicle, like an aircraft for instance, you could actually get attitude. You could figure out its orientation and whether it was rolling or pitching or yawing. Other things that they didn't realize it could really do were, for instance, seismologists use it for earthquake detection and to find out when tectonic plates are actually shifting apart. It's that good.
Something else.
Yeah. Very interesting.
Sure. So that's how it works. So the next time you want to know where you are or where you're going, don't reach for a map. Reach for your GPS. Now, which button is it here to press for a date for tonight's gathering?
That's all for this edition of NASA's Destination Tomorrow. Thanks for joining us. I'm Steele McGonigal.
And I'm Kara O'Brien. For all of us here at NASA, we'll see you next time.
Their job is search and rescue. But until the early 1980s, these crews often had little to go on. This changed when locator beacons became mandatory on small boats and planes. In an emergency, the beacons emit a signal that is picked up by a series of satellites and relayed to search and rescue forces. This NASA-initiated effort has saved more than 3,000 lives over the past 10 years. But in situations where a locator beacon doesn't activate, rescue teams are again forced to cover sometimes thousands of miles, hoping to spot the missing craft before it's too late.
Unable to identify any objects below, but definite broken trees.
Looking for a way to increase the odds of success in these beaconless searches, researchers from NASA's Goddard Space Flight Center made their way into an isolated, heavily forested area called Crystal Springs Watershed near San Francisco. As part of an ongoing experiment, their mission was to drop off a plane wreck. This particular wreckage was positioned just down a dirt road from another which had been hauled in some time ago. Both were intentionally located below a heavy canopy of trees to see if a system called Synthetic Aperture Radar, or SAR, aboard a DC-8 could detect the wrecks through the foliage. The goal was to evaluate whether this special type of radar, traditionally used in geographic and forestry studies, might also be a useful tool for search and rescue crews in crises where no locator beacon information is available, or where bad weather or trees make it impossible to see a downed plane from the air. Upon completion of a flight, the images produced by the SAR are transferred to NASA Goddard for final processing and analysis. The bright spots are things on the ground that could be the target wrecks. By filtering out features known to be part of the everyday landscape, such as buildings or towers, the location of each wreck is isolated. Colonel Jim Bigelow heads up the Civil Air Patrol search and rescue operations in the Pacific region.
We have lost 35 of our own rescue people since 1980 looking for the missing airplanes. So by getting to the airplanes faster and using the synthetic aperture radar on these difficult searches, not only will the people that are in the airplanes be saved, but we will reduce our own losses and people that are killed in this effort.
Hello and welcome back to the show. We're going to start out with the sea ice edge, looking at the northern coast here, the ice just north of Dead Horse and Prudhoe Bay. That's going to continue to erode and is approximately going to erode here in the next 7 days as expected by our ice forecasters. Now, looking at the ice edge to the north, we're expecting the circulations in the water to continue also to erode those ice edges to the north. Now let's take a look at the southeast forecast for your Saturday. More of a north to northwesterly flow across the entire area with winds rather on the light side between 10 to 15 knots. Seas will be between 2 to 3 feet across the inner channels, and across the outer waters we'll see between 4 to 6 feet. On your Sunday forecast, a little bit more of an onshore flow pattern there and a change to the southerly direction. However, wind speeds are still going to be light between 10 to 15 knots. Looking at the seas on that day, 2 to 3 feet across the inner channels, and then your outer waters are going to be 4 feet. Across the western areas of the Gulf, expect light winds there, and we'll see the highest wind speeds across Shelikof Strait, 25 knots out of the northeast direction. A little bit change of flow as you go from north to south with northerly flow over the Cook Inlet, and then more of a westerly flow to the north and an easterly flow to the south. Seas on that day are going to be between 2 to 7 feet, the highest seas across the Kodiak Island area. Now looking at your Sunday forecast, lighter speeds still, change of direction for the most part out of the east to south direction, and seas on that day are going to be between 2 to 6 feet. And we'll look at your Alaska Peninsula, a little bit stronger wind flow out of the east direction on Saturday, 25 knots, small craft advisory there, and seas across the Bering side will be 5 feet and 8 to 9 feet on the Pacific side. On your Sunday, expect lighter wind speeds for the most part, however, staying between 15 to 25 knot range. And then seas will be a little bit smaller on the Bering side, 2 to 6 feet, and 6 feet on the Pacific side. Looking at your Saturday forecast for the Aleutians, stepping out of your way so you can see the forecast for this weekend. Saturday, more of a west to northwest direction, becoming more north towards the eastern Aleutians, between 10 to 20 knots, and seas will be between 5 to 7 feet. On Sunday, expect directional changes here as well. North across the eastern areas and then to the northwest, becoming south towards the western Aleutians. Seas on this day are going to be between 4 to 7 feet. Looking at your west coast, expecting winds to be out of the northeast direction to east direction between 10 to 25 knots, highest speeds there south of Nunivak Island, and then the seas are going to be between 4 to 6 feet. Sunday, expect more of a northerly pattern across the area with 15 to 20 knot speeds, and then 2 to 5 foot seas on your Sunday. For the north and northwest coast, we're expecting winds 15 to 20 knots across towards Kotzebue Sound, and we'll see 4 to 5 foot seas, except smaller seas 2 to 3 feet across the eastern Beaufort Sea coastal areas. Now your Sunday forecast is going to be 10 to 15 knots, a change of wind direction for the locations, becoming northeast towards a northwesterly direction for Kotzebue Sound. Let's recap your forecast for tonight. We're expecting some light showers ahead of an upper level wave that comes across the northwest, and dry conditions across much of the state, except a few showers across the interior. The southwest will also see a few showers and patchy fog across the western areas of the Gulf and Kodiak Island, possibly going down to less than 1 mile at times as well for the western areas of the Bering locations. Light rain and patchy fog continuing across the Alaska Peninsula. However, rain accumulations are going to be less this weekend. Across the southern Brooks Range, expect those rivers to continue to rise through the weekend, but no rapid increases. Now Saturday's forecast, continued low pressure across the Alaska Peninsula will keep light rain in the forecast across the Bristol Bay area, isolated thunderstorms. Drier conditions across the interior and the southeast will bring temperatures in the 70 to 80 degree range. Slightly cooler temperatures across the north coast there, becoming a little bit cooler on Sunday with chances of rain and isolated thunderstorms. Have a great night.
These forecasts are to be used for planning purposes only. Call 1-800-WX-BRIEF for a formal pre-flight briefing. Always file a flight plan before you go flying. The U.S. Coast Guard Auxiliary urges you to leave a float plan with a friend or the harbor master before you go boating. Alaska Weather is made possible by the following sponsors.
The National Weather Service.